If you're watching this video, it's one of two things. You either recently picked up a gimbal or you're having troubles with gimbal footage being pretty stable and smooth and having a lot of jitters. So today I'm going to teach you how to properly balance a gimbal. Now firstly, it doesn't really matter what gimbal you are using. Whether it's a dual-handed gimbal, a single-handed gimbal, it doesn't really matter. The principles of a 3-axis gimbal remain exactly the same all the time. As an example, this is the FeiyuTech AK2000 with a circle rig. A dual-handed gimbal versus a single-handed gimbal. Now a single-handed gimbal is just a little bit more tricky to use, and that is a video for a later stage. Now for the purpose of this video, we're going to be using the FeiyuTech AK2000, which is probably one of the most trickiest gimbals to set up due to the fact that there is no lock-in on the arms, which a lot of people do like. Now if you are having troubles with gimbals, you have two potential problems. Number one is balancing your gimbal correctly, and number two is human error, or the technique that you're using is probably wrong. Otherwise, there are really no bad made gimbals nowadays. A lot of gimbals all do a very similar function. However, some may have a little bit of shuttering and different things in certain modes. But as a whole, with the proper technique, you could almost master any gimbal, even the worst. Almost. So to kick it off, we're going to start with one of the most important pieces, and that is the base plate. Now your base plate has to be straight. I see so many people setting it up and the base plate's not straight. To ensure that your base plate is straight, a lot of cameras will have a little marking underneath the lens to kind of give it its straight or true point. What you need to do is mount your base plate on the bottom of your camera. Make sure it is straight and lined up to the true straight. Tighten it up really tight so that it doesn't shift. Once that is done, you get your gimbal and you start with the 3 crucial points. Now on a gimbal, you'll hear a lot of people talking about the different tilts and axes, and there's kind of an easy way to remember it. Your pan is the left and right. You pan to the left or you pan to the right, as you did with the tripod. Your roll is if your camera has to roll over, your picture would roll over. And then you have your tilt. When you tilt a camera, you tilt it up and down, and that is the front axis. So what you need to do to start off with is to actually get your camera, slide it on to your base plate, and this is where the tricky parts start to come in. Once your camera is on, hold your tilt axis and let the camera go. If it starts to tilt forward, just slide your camera back. If it falls to the back, slide your camera forward. Pretty much like balancing a pendulum. Keep going until you have a pretty sweet spot. Once you've got that spot, tighten it up so the camera doesn't move from that point, and let it go. If you are using a zoom lens and you don't really know what to do, so for instance I have a 12 to 35mm on here, you would balance it in between the maximum zoomed out and the maximum zoomed in. So there will be a certain weight point. So what you need to do is find the closest to where you will be using the lens majority of the time, say at 25mm, and balance the lens at that point. That way when you're fully zoomed out or fully zoomed in, it will be the least effect on the motors so they don't have to work too much. So once you've got that point, you're going to then balance your tilt axis. How you balance your tilt axis is pretty simple. Turn your camera up or down and see which way it falls. So for instance, if I turn my camera up, it's falling to the front, meaning I need to loosen my tilt axis and slide my camera this way because it's falling that way. Too much? Sweet spot. Now, this is probably one of the steps that everyone forgets the most. Put your camera back in its original position without moving to any of the other axes and see if it tilts backwards or forwards. It may do so because you've now adjusted 2 very crucial points, and you may have to adjust your base plate by sliding it backwards or forwards again. Once you've got that point, you can hold your bottom arm by your pan axis and leave the top. Your roll axis will now be off balanced. So now, as you can see, it's falling too much to this side as the weight of the motor here is pulling it down. So what you need to do is loosen the motor at the back by the roll motor and slide the camera this way as it's falling that way. Too much? Perfect. Now a lot of people struggle with this when they're trying to shift an arm or a motor, because the problem is they take it and they try and push it too fast. It's very much like a syringe. If you hold a syringe through your fingers like this and pushed it, you don't have as much control as if you held it tightly in your hand and slid it with your thumb. Very similar concept. You hold the motor really tight and you hold the rest of the camera. and you only use your thumb to shift that point backwards and forwards, making it a lot easier to adjust and giving you finer movements. Now that this is done, a lot of people assume their camera is balanced and that it stays in one point, where in reality you haven't adjusted your pan motor, and this is extremely crucial and causes a lot of vibrations. Your pan motor, you turn your gimbal sideways and you let it go. As you can see, this is pretty closely balanced, but what will happen a lot of the time, and 10 to 1 if you've never balanced your pan motor, it will tend to do that. This is what you don't want. Any gimbal that's not properly balanced is causing the motors to work a lot harder to keep the camera balanced in a point that it already should be. And this is why you get slight vibrations or not so good movements. So now that the motor is falling down this way, we need to push it this way. So by holding it really, really tight, using a very similar principle, get the arm to shift through. And there we go. Unfortunately, this is not going to have the same effect as moving it there and it stays there, like you do with this type of thing. A lot of people say that when your camera is perfectly balanced, you can put it in any position and it shouldn't move. The same does not apply to balancing your pan. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. If the gimbal was designed for the camera, yes, they could find a true point and make it absolutely perfect. But in a case where gimbals are designed to work with generic cameras, not the case. So now this gimbal is pretty much perfectly balanced. If you do move your camera to a point like this on your roll axis and you let it go and it kind of comes back, it's not that it's not properly balanced. Ideally, it should be pretty static and not really move from that point. And you can adjust it backwards and forwards as much as you want, as long as it's pretty much perfect. Now, something that you should always do is double check every single tightening point after you've balanced your gimbal. The reason for this is, once a gimbal is in a position like this as an example, this arm will slide this way down, and when you tighten it, it's shifted in a different position. However, when you put it this way, that arm will fall down, creating a little bit of play. So you need to tighten it again and make sure that everything is tightened afterwards. One of the biggest mistakes I've made through using gimbals over the past few years is not checking that it's completely tight every single time. These little tightening screws actually loosen over time if you're filming with it for 4, 5, 6 hours. It's just due to the nature of tightening something that is metal on metal. So once you've balanced it, you'd power it on and the gimbal should be perfect. A lot of times with a gimbal that's not balanced properly, and this is where you'll find the majority of movement, is when you use it in a specific mode, whether it be flashlight mode or a normal mode, and you tilt either up or down. You'll see that the camera tends to have this shudder quite a bit. That's due to the gimbal just not being balanced properly. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you did, please hit the like button, smash that subscribe button. We will be posting another video on how to master the ninja walk with a method that you definitely have not seen before. So wherever you are in the world, have a good day, good evening, good night. Goodbye.